We are live, and this is the last chapter in Genius Spark. So I hope you've got a copy of your book. And the last chapter, the conclusion is Mastery Starts with the Genius Portrait. So we're back to the beginning on the magic or the formula of becoming your best self. And that's getting a clear, compelling picture of who you are at your best. Now, a couple of updates. We have taken all of the LinkedIn Lives. We've taken the transcript. We've created content or articles from it. Discussion guides if you want to have your own book club. We're using the Teachable platform. So if you want to have a book club for your group, going through all the chapters, all the LinkedIn Lives that we've got that are all edited, cleaned up, ready to go, just reach out and we'll help you get set up. Now, I've got my note cards. I went through the conclusion yesterday, and it's been a lot of fun for me to go back. As a writer, once you write something, you don't want to look at it for a long time because of all the labor and effort. But going through it, there's a certain kind of mindset. You get a flow state where things come in a fluidness and a clarity that you don't typically get unless you're really in that zone of writing. So it's been fun going back, seeing those. And I've pulled out what I consider to be the golden nuggets from the chapter. The chapter is starting with the portrait and going back to where we start. This is an inner journey. And a lot of the influences in my life have been the Stoic philosophers, Joseph Campbell, Jesus of Nazareth, and the New Testament and the writers there in terms of looking on the inside. And part of the whole purpose of the Genius Portrait is that the Clifton Strengths gives us a look inside the brain, how we're wired, and the strongest parts of our wiring that show up when we're at our best, that help us in survival mode and can get in our way. It's a neat tie-in to the ancient wisdom and modern science, and I'll make that a little clearer as we get into this LinkedIn Live. The portrait is the first step to make it clear, to make it compelling, and that clear and compelling picture is what you're telling your brain over and over. This is who I am at my best, or this is how I want to show up at my best. We talked earlier in the series about the research on the brain as a guidance system, a goal-seeking organ. It seeks out the things that it strongly wants and the things that might harm it or kill it. This is ancient wiring that we have. In the 1970s, the book Psycho-Cybernetics brought this metaphor to the forefront of understanding the brain as something that can be programmed. You give it coordinates, that's the paragraph, or the destination of a missile, or the temperature setting of a thermostat. Then you give it feedback, and with those two things, it goes on course. With our lives, it's not a jump to the future. It's an incremental little bit at the time, but slow and steady, reinforcement, just like a child starting out learning to play piano, and they start out with the one finger and then they start moving into chords. Then they might learn a song. Slowly with practice, it becomes more natural, more instinctive, more fluid, and more expressive, individual expression. It's the same thing with who we are and how we show up. The difference is we understand those practices and disciplines. If, for example, you're a musician, an athlete, a scientist, whatever those professions are, we understand the need to practice. For example, an air traffic controller takes 6 years of training and experience on the scope, the little screen that manages all those airplanes before someone is proficient enough to take your life and my life in their hands and direct an airplane. We also know about the 10,000 hour rule, and that's a generality. It's a rule of thumb in terms of mastery. If we think about, what about me? What about me as a project? What about my life as a destination? The same way an athlete or a musician might look at it. One of the motivations for developing the Genius Spark, I had been doing parts of this for well over a decade. But during the pandemic, talking to people who were struggling and asking them questions like, what gets you up in the morning? Or can you tell me what your purpose is? And it's interesting, out of more than 100 individuals that I talked to asking the question about what is your purpose, not a single one could articulate it. And so today, as we conclude this series, I want to make it very clear and simple on how to go about doing this. Their happiness was dependent on their circumstances. Happiness, happenstance, that's all circumstantial. When somebody's project was canceled, when their career stagnated, when their job was eliminated, when they didn't have a sense of where they stood in the organization anymore because of the disruption, their mental health, their happiness cratered. For me, that realization came 25 years ago during the dot-com crash, and I've told the story before, where all of the circumstances, it was the perfect storm of financial crisis in our company, career crisis, home relationship crisis, health crisis, being 50 pounds heavier than I am today. All of that collided, and I'm fortunate because of that. If it hadn't happened, I may have gone like that frog in the pot, continuing to sit as the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter until something broke that I didn't have time to repair or couldn't repair anymore. And even now, as I work with leaders and leadership teams, and I see people's physical health, and I see lethargy, and I see attitude corrosion over time, I know those are all the warning signs that unless they do something different, they're going to go on and either ultimately sell out, compromise, health will break down, relationships will break down. And it's sad to see, once you go through something like that, that is so disruptive in your life and forced you to have to confront things, then it's much easier to pick up those early warning signs when you see that in others. To get to purpose, let's make this easy. Let's go back to Maslow about 70 years ago. He was one of the fathers of positive psychology. So let's call him the grandfather of positive psychology. The fathers of positive psychology was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi out of the University of Chicago. He wrote a book called Flow. And then Martin Seligman, who was at the University of Pennsylvania. Those two in 1999 began this new movement to shift psychology and research to optimizing people's potential instead of minimizing their deficits, which psychology was focused on at the time. Maslow said, what a man can be, he must be. In other words, inside of us, we have this understanding, this instinct around our potential. And unless we're experiencing and moving towards that potential, then we're forever frustrated in our life and our efforts. Out of this, he developed this pyramid we call the hierarchy of needs. He didn't create a pyramid. At each level, there is this must-be sense. I must become a better version of myself and continue to move towards that. And of course, we know at the very bottom is physical security, and then psychological security, and then connectedness, and then recognition and self-actualization. There's actually another one above that called transcendence. That's the ladder that we all want to go up to. But what we've discovered is that all of that potential and eagerness and openness to being that original self we were begins to disappear once we go into school. That's the NASA research. And we learn to fit in. So we do become disassociated with understanding what we must be or understanding what we could be, and therefore turning it into a must-be drive, an imperative. We have that common need to discover and become our best self. Now, part of that is understanding it's not the outcome that brings the satisfaction. It is the engagement in the process or the journey. When I was playing tennis, my satisfaction came oftentimes in just being freed up to experience a new approach to a shot, experiencing the repetition of successfully hitting the ball in the sweet spot over and over. And of course, I enjoyed the victories. But for most people, you have as many losses as you have victories. And unless you win the tournament, you go to a certain point and you lose. In that, if the focus is only on the winning or the losing, it becomes a very emotional up and down process. Those who find their joy in the process, in the disciplines, in the practice, in the engagement, that's the part that determines happiness, which connects with what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi found, is that it's the flow, being in the moment, experiencing fully what you're going through rather than the outcome. There's a book called Inner Tennis. And the mind, we have learned in the past, tends toward negative thinking. In fact, undirected mind or mindlessness, 80% of that tends towards the negative. In the book Inner Tennis, it talks about being present, and the way it does that is you internally say when the ball hits the ground, you say bounce. When you make contact, you say hit. And the level of presence that you have is directly related to the timing of whether you say early, bounce, just before it bounces, or late. That tells you a little bit of the anxiety you may have or not being fully in that moment. And that's a gear that we would use to make sure that I'm focusing on the experience of making the contact or watching the ball. If I'm saying bounce when it actually bounces and hit when it's actually hitting in my head, then I'm focusing completely on the ball rather than where it's going. And then trust my mind because I've visualized where I want the ball to go. Oftentimes under pressure, I would want to go for a shot that was a winning shot that was near a boundary. Oftentimes my mind would say, okay, be careful, don't hit it out. In the book Inner Tennis, it talks about when you tell that, the mind doesn't hear the don't. It just hears the affirmative, hit it out. Oftentimes when you're trying to be careful, you're not fully letting your motion hit the ball, and then you tighten up, and that's when you hit it out. I think that's a wonderful analogy in terms of how we perform throughout the day. There's a movie my wife and I just watched called Inside Out 2. It's incredible in terms of understanding the hormones in the body. And this takes the girl from her childhood where joy was the dominant, the uninhibited joy part, that genius part was the dominant theme. And then it brings her into puberty, where a whole new group of hormones come in, such as anxiety, envy, ennui, and shame. And it really plays all that out. And you'll be able to relate to those moments when you're not your authentic self and one of those characters shows up to sabotage you. So remember that our level of engagement is the thing that determines our happiness, not the end state. When we're focused on becoming our best self, we have clarity about our purpose. Our purpose is to become our best self. If we're not clear about our purpose and the mission to continue to incrementally become a better version, what happens is we miss the small daily lessons on the path to becoming our best self. When you're acutely aware of why I'm doing what I'm doing, what my purpose is, and it's not the end game, and there's always that tension and battle between the outcome that I'm seeking and being my best self and not having confidence in that best self and playing it safe in order to make sure the outcome is under control, so to speak. When we're in that zone of being mindful about process and the journey and being our best self, then what happens is we pick up lots of little lessons along the way. Did I pay attention to that person when I was talking to them? Was my mind someplace else? It's a wonderful way to continue to check yourself to see, am I showing up at my best? Or am I worried and thinking about the future? Or am I feeling disappointed because of something that happened in the past? This game, we bounce back and forth, but being clear about what our purpose is, become our best self and showing up at our best, helps us with that. There's a phrase that I picked up from Brian Johnson. He's a great modern day philosopher and teacher. And he's quoting one of his mentors. And instead of having our eye on the prize, he says, let's keep our eye on the path. So let's keep our eye on the path. And the path is this. I want to become the best version of who I am in every situation. In order to do that, I've crafted a picture of what that is. That's the portrait. I've reinforced that picture as I start the day with intentionality. And then I'll keep checking in with myself on how am I showing up at my best throughout the day. Part of the challenge that I ran into over the past few years in working with people who were struggling is that they were trying to figure out their why. And there's a big emphasis on finding your why. I love Simon Sinek. He was very transformational in my businesses in terms of trying to understand and communicate to clients why we do what we do. Here's how we do it, and then talk about the what side of the equation. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was struggling, and she teared up, and I could hear the passion in her voice for the work she's doing and the people that she supports. And she's taking time off. And she's struggling and trying to find out, quote, her why, wanting to have that clarified. We started talking about who are you at your best? What does that look like? No matter what condition you're in, no matter what circumstances you may be, if you're clear, if you have that clarity about self, the agency that you feel like I am in control of how I show up. This is Viktor Frankl's logotherapy and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. That even in the hardest conditions, in a Nazi concentration camp, that you can still find purpose and meaning and a clarity about sense of self and showing up at your best, even in those situations. I'm not going to pretend that I'm capable of doing that, but I have learned from my lesson in the 2000s where I wasn't my best and I was outcome focused and having transitioned. And then when the pandemic hit and I lost all of my business within a month, that it didn't rattle me. Well, for a little bit, I hyperventilated, but no more than 2 or 3 days. And then it was, okay, know what I can control, know what I can't control. How would I show up at my best in these conditions? What would I do? My learner strength kicked into, I've been talking about doing virtual content and video for 5 years and haven't done a thing about it. And my achiever said, well, you don't have any excuses anymore, so let's get to it. My relator said, oh, I've got a great colleague. His name is Luke. He's a master at this. I'm going to give Luke a call and have him come and set up my office. And then we began the process, and here I am today. This is a big part of what my business is and a big way that I help my clients and also find new clients by doing this kind of format. And if you want to see how we made the studio, it's on the website. There's a series of videos with Luke and I creating that in 2020. So number one is, let's find out who we are at our best. Let's start with who, because the why will come later. Then the next is where. Where do I fit best that demands the best of me? And then what can I contribute? When I'm at my best, what can I contribute in this place that I'm in? Those are the 3 elements. The why, to me, is a bit of a mystery. Some people have it clear, know exactly what they want and why they want it. I think for a lot of people, why comes in the rearview mirror, in retrospect. You've gone through all of this, and then all of a sudden, like a very cool story that has several different elements to it, it becomes clearer as you go further down the road looking backwards. And I think that's my experience with why. I've come clearer and clearer. I'll be 70 in January. And for me, that's a more common experience than finding it on the front end and then pursuing the Holy Grail, like in Indiana Jones, going after some kind of treasure. I think for me and for many, it's in the rearview mirror because I've been consistently following, becoming my best self, finding the place where I can be my best self, finding the kinds of contributions as a result of being my best self, and then watching the pieces and trusting that the universe, and in my particular walk, it's the faith I have, that'll lead to the greater purpose. Let's talk about the intrinsic side of the conversation, because we've talked about the challenges of external rewards and external goals and situations that we depend upon to make us feel good and happy, which I feel oftentimes is a distraction and takes us away from the deeper opportunities that we have to find fulfillment, not happiness, but fulfillment. I was a kid that grew up results-oriented. In fact, strategic and achiever in my top 5. I was the kid in the car that asked, are we there yet? That's been a struggle for me my whole life. Now, my younger son, Tyler, he's process-oriented. He's very diligent and disciplined about the process. He's a musician, now he's an engineer, and he's very good at that. So those are 2 different, distinct mindsets on going through it. He's very comfortable taking the time, building to some outcome. I'm immediately got the goal in mind, where I want to go, and I work my way backwards. What I'm striving to become better at day after day is being present, neither result-oriented or process-driven, but present, building on my strengths, trusting my strengths in real time, to do what they do best, and then let the outcomes flow from that. I'm going to share a story about a golfer. It's the great story about being present and process-oriented. The challenge in our world is the drive for immediate results. That challenge for immediate results, what happens is stepping over many steps along the way, we miss the important lessons that we have to have because we're not engaged. We're goal-driven. And engaging in the process is part of the way to pick up those lessons along the way. And if we're short-term driven and we get there, there's a lot of things and mistakes along the way and lessons we miss that we just have to relearn over and over. It's a circular process. Short-term goals are not sustainable over time because we don't learn from them. We learn in the process. We don't learn after the fact. I'm in the construction world, do a lot of projects. Projects have lots of challenges. And oftentimes there's a retrospective in the project. We got there, we had all kinds of problems. Most projects come in late and over budget, over 70%. And there's an attempt to do lessons learned. But do those transfer to the next project, to the next experience? They don't. The industry talks about that challenge all the time, but because it's so outcome-driven, goal-driven, there's no way to step back and go back into the experience of where we went wrong or where we made the wrong decision or the situation that caused us to go one direction versus the other. We can no longer capture that. It's no longer experiential for us. Some people have baggage when we use the word mindfulness. Think of mindfulness as simply your ability to focus on what you want to focus in for as long as you want to focus on it. That is mindfulness. There are certain conditions that you need to think about. If I'm going to focus, this is what I need to do. What does it look like to design a time where you're in that flow state? What Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says. I set aside the first 2 hours of every day to work on things that will get me into the flow state. That's typically creative content, proposals where I really want to think through what I'm trying to offer to a client, and that deep concentration mode. Just to be real, I get to do that 3.5, 4 days a week where I get that quality time. There are other times where I have to take a meeting or like this morning, take an early breakfast, but most of the time I get that. Another part too is how you use the waiting time. So if you use waiting time and go to distractions like your phone, then you're not preparing, you're not practicing the ability to be present and to be focused. So I've used like times I'm stuck in a traffic jam and started taking advantage of waiting and using that as reflective time, as thoughtfulness time, as gratitude time, as opposed to immediately going to a distraction. A good friend and client of mine, Mark Vrogo, wrote a book called Waiting is Not a Waste. It was a real eye-opener for me, and I'm still in that mode of working better, becoming my best self, incrementally getting better on using those times, having an immediate plan if something I have to wait on, stuck in traffic or in an airport, I can immediately go to things that bring me into a focus mode or a mindfulness mode or something that is more high value than just distraction. We've talked about the journey. There's two metaphors I'd like to use. A GPS that gives you the end game and then routes you the most efficient way. And there's no adventure in that. It's just the efficient way to get from point A or B. Or a guiding star. So think of the guiding star. The story in the New Testament of the three wise men and the guiding star that took them and the journey and the adventure they were on, the hero's journey. There's nothing risked, no moving outside your comfort zone. So anytime you move outside the comfort zone, you're giving yourself the opportunity to learn. Otherwise, another word for it is fail. If you're in that comfort zone all the time, if it's the shortest distance between A and B, whether it's a project or going someplace else, you don't discover anything new. You don't grow. You don't think differently. Taking different routes makes you think differently. Now, many, many times, like when I'm going to the airport, I don't want to think differently. I just want to get there on time. But I do have strategies in the car that help keep my mind positively engaged. When we talk about intrinsic focus, an intrinsic simply means what's instinctively rewarding inside of you. And there's several different ways to look at that. Part of it is playing to your strengths, the engagement you feel with the hormones, the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin, and the endorphins going on when you're playing to your strengths. Doing something meaningful with purpose, or being engaged in meaningful conversations with friends, or accomplishing something. All of those things, they're valued because of just the experience being valued. They're valued for their own sake. Aristotle described 4 virtues that are intrinsic: the search for wisdom, courage, prudence, and temperance. Here's where ancient wisdom meets modern science. Dr. Seligman and a group of close to 200 scientists wanted to find out what the modern day equivalents of these virtues are. The way they did it is they searched all of the major wisdom traditions and religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Taoism, Confucianism, and looked at what are the virtues that are common between all of them. So what's universal, and then what's intrinsic? What is rewarding just for the sake of rewarding? And then they added 2 additional virtues. So now from 4 it goes to 6. Humanity is one of them, and justice is another. They've developed an assessment very similar to the Clifton Strengths, and it's interesting how similar they are. And also that Martin Seligman was a protege of Donald Clifton. So think of Donald Clifton as the father of strength psychology, focusing on what's strong versus what's wrong. And then Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the fathers of positive psychology, focusing on the positive attributes and optimizing our upside versus minimizing our. These virtues, when we looked at them and we researched them, we saw a really close correlation between, for example, zest in the virtue and achiever in the strengths. And we started looking at, I wonder if we looked at these strengths through a different lens, whether we could derive at the underlying virtue or the best and highest expression of that strength. So we've found this nice marriage between the virtues and the strengths. The way we talk about it in the book is think of virtues are the end game, the higher purpose, the goal. And mastery is excellence. So mastery in the strengths, and then mastery can lead to virtue. I'll give you an example. An individual, and I'll call him Ben, and he lives in the Middle East. His strengths are relator, competition, focus, futuristic, and activator. He's an incredible sales and marketing person, and I would say he's masterful at it. He can build trust with relator, stay laser focused on the goal to sell them on this program that they have. In fact, he sold me on the program, and then as he experienced what we do, I sold him on our program, and we've built an incredible relationship. He has this ability to help someone see their better future, put it into action, and then he's got competition, that ability to win or succeed and close the deal. During the pandemic, their company was experiencing this downturn, and his competition has such a high drive, and it was designed in this company where he succeeds. He's not really worried about other people. And he's a 7-figure salesperson with this organization. So I talked to him during one of these down periods, and he's playing video games. And I say, Ben, how much time do you spend a day playing video games? He says, I got nothing to do. I'm spending 6 to 8 hours. I said, really? I said, it sounds like that's a great outlet for your competition, but not a very good outlet. Great in terms of he's using his competition, but not very good in terms of what it's being used for. And then I said, you see competition as you win. What if you saw a better, higher use of competition in helping show the company how they can win during this difficult time and be prepared when you're coming out of it? And he thought about it. The other thing I shared with him, because he was very successful at having relationships with women. That was one of the things. He traveled the world and he had all these relationships that he would share with me. And I said, Ben, you're masterful at building trust and getting what you want. But the underlying virtue of Relator is to be a genuine friend. Okay, so this is percolating in him, and I've dropped these heavies on him. And he comes back a couple weeks later and talks about an event that he designed for his company. That was a way to help them come together, share knowledge, help each other become better, and understand how they could become winners as a group. He was jazzed and pumped up. Then he came back and shared about a waiter at a restaurant that he frequented because he loved the service of the waiter, but had never really built a relationship with him. He had the waiter sit down, built a relationship, was able to give him guidance and counsel. They became friends. He was pumped. And he came back and said, Rex, I won't use the word he used before that, but he said, you freaking changed my life. And it did, because he was not just being masterful in applying it for his own outcomes. He saw that there was a higher element built inside of those strengths that brought him to a higher level of satisfaction and being able to give to others. The interesting thing is a couple months later, he called and he says, I'm engaged. And that never would have happened unless we had that conversation. I want to talk now about how do we help everybody embed or feel who they look like at their best. And we'll talk about Dave and something that I call an appreciation bath. We had a retreat at the property. River Rose is the corporate retreat facility that we live on, and we've got a couple buildings for that. And this group came in, and they all created their genius paragraphs. And this was a particular group that knew each other very well. And Dave read his paragraph. And he's what we call a servant leader. He leads by example, very humble individual, but very gifted. After he read it, he was ready for us to move on. I said, no, let's wait a second. Let's hear what others have to say. So you heard Dave's paragraph. Share with the group how you experienced Dave and where you see some of those traits come out. One after another, over and over again, talked about Dave's behind-the-scene heroism, how he helps unselfishly, serves. They called him the backbone of the company. Loyal, reliable. And when this happened, of course, he was quiet the whole time. I just paused, not rushing this. So if you're facilitating something like this, this is a conversation you do not want to rush. You just want people to take it in. And I said, how do you feel? He was quiet. He said, wow, I feel a bit overwhelmed. And he said, I need a moment to gather my thoughts. And he said, it felt great, but it also felt uncomfortable. So what is going on here? First of all, I think it's universal for many of us. If someone is giving us a genuine complement that goes beyond our mask or our defense mechanisms and hits us right where we feel and need it. We're not ready for that oftentimes. It's uncomfortable, but it feels so good and it's so needed. Remember earlier in one of the episodes, we talked about the thing that people crave the most, but get the least, is genuine insight, feedback, and appreciation for the magic we bring for our best self. Remember, our definition of genius is what comes natural to you but looks like magic to me. So again, he's taking what he does for granted, and it just gave everybody a chance to reflect and appreciate the gift, that appreciation shower that he received. I've done this many, many times. I did it with a very challenging group over in Europe, and we just pulled a big circle. We spent the whole morning doing it. Part of that was because of the number of people. That was the highlight of everything we did. Learning about the strengths and all that, that was the highlight. That broke loose the feeling of connectedness, the understanding that, oh, you actually see me. It's not transactional. This is a tremendous tool, and it's very simple because all it is I'm telling you what I think I look like at my best, and then you're sharing back to me times where you've seen and experienced that and what it's meant to you. Another tool that we have for that is the user trait worksheet, where we can take a little more structured approach, and you can give me your trait worksheet, which is basically your strengths and then the traits choices underneath each strength. And I can build my version of a paragraph of how I experience you at your best and how I see your strengths get in the way. And we can have that, what we call share and compare conversation. Again, one of the most powerful things people go through and one of the most powerful relationship building conversations that you will have. I've done it with my family. I think I shared earlier, a couple years ago at Christmas, before we exchanged gifts, I gave my trait worksheet to each of my 3 kids. Michelle said, "Dad, you're turning Christmas into a workshop." So we all got a chuckle out of that. But they built it. They really enjoyed it because it helped them express how they experienced me and for us to have the conversation. Remember, the value is not what they pick. It's the conversation that comes out of these tools. It's not the tool. And oftentimes we confuse getting the homework done versus the point underneath it, which is the conversation. It was 2+ hours of conversation and laughing back and forth. And I walked away with insight that I hadn't received from anybody else, because in my strategic, they picked a trait that gets in my way that I will cut them off at times, their conversation, because I assume I know where they're headed and won't let them finish. All 3 of them picked that. I didn't think I would get anything, quote, new, except we'd have a great conversation, but I did. And I wondered, what is it about my relationship with them where all 3 of them experienced that as the trait that gets in my way in strategic? And who else is experiencing that? And I just don't know. So let's talk about virtue again. Let's go back to that. The underlying essence or nature of a virtue is something that you enjoy simply for the sake of doing it. And I think you could also say, and Martin Seligman says this, these are traits that you instinctively want more of, not less of. So we wouldn't want less justice. We want more justice. We wouldn't want less courage. We want more courage. We wouldn't want less wisdom. We want more wisdom. And I've used that as a great test on something that has the essence or the elements of something virtuous in it. So when we look at how do we go about this journey of activating our strengths, we've talked about the universal purpose of becoming our best self. Now, the next part of it is finding that unique purpose. In other words, the place where we fit that demands the best of us. And that sometimes gets confused with the why. But remember, if you look at your strengths, you can apply them in many areas and come out masterful in it. And we'll discover soon here that mastery is the key to happiness and fulfillment. I did not go to college to study to be a project manager. I was a tennis pro out of college and met a girl, needed to get married, and someone in her church had a job open as a project manager. But I developed mastery using all my strengths. And that mastery built bridges to doing other things that were more tailored, more intentional around what I love to do and enjoy most. When you're looking at the unique fit, look at wherever you're at or look for the opportunity that demands you play to your strengths and demands the best of you and serves others. Those are things to help you find your purpose. So the universal purpose, become your best self. The unique purpose is the where and the what that demands the best of me. So this makes it a lot easier for you. It's not searching for the Holy Grail. Many roads can get to where you develop this mastery. There's a book by two Stanford professors, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, called Designing Your Life. And they've got a great story in that book that talks about an accountant who felt like, I don't like what I'm doing, so maybe I need to go to law instead of accounting. Already had the accounting degree, already a CPA, already practicing, but here's that edge. When they went down to the deeper level, and I don't know if they used an assessment, but they basically asked the question, what parts of accounting do you enjoy most and what parts not? This is what we call the gain or drain exercise. Where do I get energized? Where do I get drained? Got energized by solving complex problems without people involved. Got drained by doing all the customer interface. Once that individual had that focus and could find the where they can play to their strengths and do it at their best, it brought great fulfillment and happiness. So mastery, becoming really good at something, and remember, that doesn't happen overnight. Finding and developing mastery then opens doors and leads to you being able to tailor what you want to do and how you want to do it. It builds that discretionary opportunity. We've got this ladder of development, of growth, and it starts out with the discovery phase. And the discovery is, oh, here are the results, and I relate to this, I don't relate to that, or I don't understand this. The second level is the understanding your uniqueness, what it means, what each trait and strength means. Then connecting that understanding with actual experience. What does it feel like when I'm in the zone? Or when my achiever is getting things done? Or what does it feel like when I'm under pressure? The next part is, under the pressure side, remember the shadow or kryptonite elements turn up typically under stress or when I'm clueless and lacking self-awareness of what it looks and feels like on the other side of me. Then learning how to perform under pressure. That is a tipping point. And after that, developing mastery. And mastery is that instinctive, real-time, intuitive ability to function. It's what we call that unconscious competence. And we all go through the stages like a young student learning piano for the first time of unconscious incompetence. I don't know what I don't know. Conscious incompetence. Oh, this is hard and I can only do one finger, or I can only do my right hand. I can't do my left hand, and working and working and working. Then conscious competence. I know what I can do and I'm thinking and focusing on that. And that gets you to a certain level, but then unconscious competence is that mastery level. And you can think of that in any environment. You can think about that in your next meeting. How are you showing up? Are you showing up engaged, present, in the moment, bringing your best, playing to your strengths, or are you checked out? So let's end with a story of Ben Crane. This wraps everything we're talking about into a great story. So Ben Crane was a PGA golfer who started on the tour in 2000. By 2006, he had the highest scores of a player under 30. And then for the next 3 years, he experienced several injuries, wasn't sure if he would ever make it back. He qualified in 2009 and struggled through the whole season. Then he met Lenny Basham, who's an Olympic gold medalist and coach in target shooting. He began working with him and focusing strictly on process, the stance, the backswing, contact point, follow through. Stance, backswing, contact point, follow through. Remember the inner tennis analogy, bounce hit. Staying always in that, not caring or worrying about where it's going. In 2010, after struggling in 2009, he entered the Torrey Pines Classic, sponsored by Farmers Insurance. He played in the zone the whole tournament. On the 18th hole, he was one putt away from winning $1 million, and it was a 30-foot putt. As he made the putt and it went in, and people began to cheer, and his partner came up to shake his hand, he was stunned, and he asked, "Did I win?" Then his wife came running on, and then he knew he had won, but he was so focused on the process of execution. But think about the pressure he was under. I'm not saying I could do it under that situation. In fact, I probably couldn't, even in tennis. The stakes are high, and we see it all the time. When the stakes are high, we're under the gun, where we begin to think about what could go wrong, or we think about, how do I get out of this? Our thoughts leave the present, and we begin going all over the place. Little by little, we can practice that, and we can become focused, being our best self in the moment. Start with your next team meeting. See if you can show up at your best. The next part of this, and the final part, is thinking about designing your best day. If you can design a single day and design, this is the formula for me to have my best day, then you can repeat that over and over and get there. I read my portrait in the morning. So part of my best day starts the night before, when I think about the next day and what are the essential things I want to get done. Waking up consistently, getting my mindset, doing some meditation reading, read my paragraph. I imagine how I'm going to show up at my best. I have certain micro goals throughout the day. And then as I walk through the day, at the end of the day, I'll reflect back and find those highlight moments and put it all together. Building your genius paragraph is not the end of it. It's the beginning. Small and consistent reinforcements, imagining, and feedback is critical. And if you do that, it's like compound interest. It just builds and builds and builds. You'll go from that mechanical consciousness to fluidness, and then unconscious expression in real time, even anticipating. I can anticipate certain people that I'm not sure I trust because of my relator. As you do this, the genius emerges when we embrace that childhood originality that we had. Your portrait is the trailhead. It's the beginning of the journey. Some people only need the map to get started. Some will need what I needed, is that rude wake-up call. Either way, I want to see you start the journey, connect with us to get help on the journey. We've attempted to make this as simple as possible because it is very simple. Who are you at your best? How does that look when you show up? How do you get in your way? And then giving that input to others. When you see something that they do that you don't do that makes you wonder, say, wow, that's incredible. I can't do that. I appreciate what you do. Here's what it means to me. So we're at the end of the journey. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.